in the cryptocurrency space. I am your host, Peter, joined as always by Ozzy. There's a lot to get to, so let's jump right in. Please do your own research. This is not financial advice. Lead story this morning, we're recording on Monday as usual. Microstrategy buys another 147 million worth of Bitcoin. This was an SEC filing submitted on Monday. So this happened between August 1st and September 24th. The firm and its subsidiaries purchased approximately 5,445 Bitcoin for almost 147 million in cash. Average price, 27,053. This all started back in August 2020, and MicroStrategy has accumulated 150,245 Bitcoin. I've got that at around 1% of BTC's of total coin supply, but they bought for 4.68 billion, and they're at 4.1 today. So still buying, even though they're a little underwater.
Yeah, they're not real. Like, their average price is about 29,500, and that's not too bad compared to current prices. In reality, when you think about the next bull market, I don't think after this bear market, Bitcoin will ever drop below their average price. And so, good for him. Keep buying, keep stacking sats. Bitcoin Max.
This is your ETF without an ETF, buying MicroStrategy stock?
Potentially. And you would essentially be owning direct real Bitcoin for sure. And you might even get a better DCA on Bitcoin because the company might be undervalued right now. Who knows? I have no clue. Check your MicroStrategy stock and do your own research.
Yeah, I remember back in August 2020 how big of a story it was that they bought some Bitcoin. It was major.
It was, and it's major enough that we're still talking about it when they buy.
Sure.
But it does not influence the price nearly as much, but I think that has to do with just how the market is. The market's a little bit more insensitive to the news, and I think that's a good thing because the market's more mature, and hopefully the market continues maturing as we look kind of into the future.
To be fair, this was before the Fed started raising interest rates too. The market was a whole different beast in August 2020.
Oh yeah, we hadn't even seen 69K yet, so...
Yeah, this is before the all-time highs, before the pivot from the Fed. Yeah, a lot of different things. But speaking of ETFs, little ETF update. Bitwise, which is in kind of that basket of ETFs with a spot Bitcoin application in. And just a quick little update. We're about 20 days out from the next time the SEC has to say something. And one of the ones they have to comment on is Bitwise. They added 40 pages of research on an amended filing this Monday, addressing the SEC's rebuttals to various Bitcoin ETF filings. The new filing pointed specifically to the SEC allowing 2 Bitcoin futures ETFs. And the new filing comes a month after the Grayscale's legal victory against the SEC in the DC Court of Appeals, where judges in that case said the regulator's approval of said Bitcoin futures ETF, but not allowing the Grayscale one was arbitrary and capricious. There was one note in however, it should be noted that the SEC can still choose to appeal this DC court decision, at least temporarily dampening the precedent it sets. But yeah, I thought this was an interesting story.
It is an interesting story, especially because at Permissionless, the chief of investment from Bitwise said they'd applied for 2 Bitcoin spot ETFs in the past, and they said they would not apply for a third one until they were sure it was going to be approved, and he said they had just applied for one. So this is a statement, and Bitwise is definitely trying to do their best to ensure that it does get approved. If I look at the big deadlines, really we're talking between the 16th and 19th of October.
Right.
And so kind of our second deadline for most of these projects. We're really waiting to see, but I don't think we're going to see an approval. I think we'll see another delay until January. It's
hard to imagine the SEC getting behind it with all the fraudsters and hucksters, as he likes to say.
Exactly. I just don't think the SEC is ready for it. right now. They want to straighten out a lot of other books, especially comments that have been made around going after centralized and decentralized exchanges, and that they weren't done with that. So that would suggest that, SushiSwap, Uniswap, any other DEX could still become a target for the SEC, because they're apparently not done their tirade. The CBDC efforts in the US are at least partially being pushed back on by House Republicans, but also bipartisan support at least. The House Financial Services Committee is sending another crypto bill to the floor, which is aiming to ban the Federal Reserve from issuing a retail digital currency and from participating in any pilot programs involving one. The bill sponsor, Tom Emmer, who I get to see speak at Permissionless, says that the retail digital currency could be used for citizen surveillance and requires any progress to be explicitly empowered by Congress and doesn't want the Fed to just be running wild with that. On the other side, Maxine Waters, who's the top Democrat on the Senate panel, she framed it that it seems that the use of a CBDC will keep banning the use of a CBDC will keep the U.S. behind other countries, including China, as a race forward to develop a global standard for central bank digital currencies. So Democrats, especially Senate Democrats, maybe don't have as much appetite for this bill as the bipartisan House Financial Services Committee.
Yeah, it's interesting. You have the SEC chair saying, "Oh, we need to stop," kind of slowing down innovation, and then you have Maxine Watts kind of envious of how fast China is moving, but they seem to be envious just of the control it gives them. You know what I mean? Like they want to develop the global standard for central bank digital currency, but it's just a little scary, that they're a little envious of what China is doing. When on the surface, we seem to be very different than China in terms of our freedoms.
Exactly. That's a very interesting thing, and I'm not surprised that this was the stance that Maxine Waters took, especially as a senator in the main part of the demo. We'll see what happens. I think we'll probably see a change over time on what might happen. I do think that this probably won't pass, but it might.
Yeah, it got voted out of the committee on party lines, so all the Republicans, they just have a majority in this particular committee. But yeah, what happens on the House floor is a whole different ball.
Exactly.
Ball game.
And you still got to pass the Senate, and that's where I've got concerns on whether or not it'll actually pass the Senate.
Yeah, they're framing their argument. I mean, if this stays party lines, nothing's gonna happen. That's for sure.
Yeah, but that said, we are seeing some more things happening in the political realm. Bitcoin critic Senator Menendez has been charged with corruption and bribery. Senator Menendez co-sponsored the Accountability for Cryptocurrency in El Salvador Act, which was trying to prove that there was cybersecurity risks, economic stability, and democratic governance risks created in El Salvador because of their adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender. The senator said that the anonymous nature of Bitcoin transactions makes it an ideal choice for criminals. But he's now been charged with the fact that he accepted bribes in the forms of hundreds of thousands of dollars in exchange for his power and influence from at least 2018 to at least 2022. So this is pretty serious. I mean, you don't need Bitcoin to be a criminal. Although it hasn't been proved in court. The search warrant executed in June of 2022 found over $500,000 in cash, a luxury vehicle, and over $100,000 in gold bars. So
this guy's old school.
very old school. Menendez probably realized he couldn't accept it in Bitcoin, and
Well, maybe he could have. Who knows?
or
But
maybe
I
they
think it
didn't
goes
want to
to
give it
show.
to him in Bitcoin.
Yeah, he's not comfortable with it, maybe just because it's a newer thing. I don't know, but just the fact that he would say this, and he hasn't been proven guilty, but it just goes to show it's not the Bitcoin that makes the criminal; it's the actions of the person using it and the intent. It's like banning crowbars to stop burglars. You can do cash, you can do gold, you can do Bitcoin. If you want to steal. I mean, Bitcoin's an immutable ledger. Right? Some would argue that there's more proof against it. But yeah, I mean, he's going to come out and say, "Oh, well, it's just another sign of a apology." Saying one thing, being a bit of a hypocrite. Like I said, this will have to go through the courts. Yeah, why didn't he, instead of taking gold bars, cash, luxury vehicle, I don't know why he didn't use his insider information to do stock trades like the rest of the congressmen.
Interestingly, Guatemala is trying to use blockchain to make their elections more secure. So this was a pretty interesting move, real show of adoption of blockchain, because given long-standing issues with political corruption and election fraud in Guatemala, the Supreme Tribunal worked with ITZ Data to implement a simple proof system to basically back up their election documents and protect them from tampering. It's also hoping to provide a layer of transparency and accountability so that citizens can independently verify the integrity of election documents. So this is super interesting, and one of those cases where blockchain helping governance in the world and helping prevent corruption and fraud. And so I think this is major in advancing global politics, rooting out corruption, and providing transparency for citizens.
When I first heard about Bitcoin and just blockchain technology, I couldn't help but imagine it helping with There's always one side, whoever lost is arguing this was stolen. There's fraud, there's corruption, something's not right. And it's like, well, if we can verify this, we can take away that argument. How healthy would that be for democracy? It just seems to fit. Now, specifically, this one allows citizens to access and independently verify the timestamp data for each tally. So it doesn't validate the accuracy of the information on the tally sheets, but it's forward. And it's really the triple entry accounting nature of Bitcoin and blockchain allows for an immutable ledger to be audited by anyone, not just by the involved. So this the idea that it can help with elections, very, very fascinating to me. So it's nice to see a step forward, and I hope to see more of this in the future, personally.
Yeah. So I do think that, blockchain will help with the government and will help with elections. I think this is the first step. I almost wonder if we might see us vote with NFTs in the future. I think that could be a very...
imagine how it actually works. It's hard for me to get my head around, but it seems like there is a solution in here somewhere where we could have verifiable elections that everyone can trust.
Yeah. So I think that that's a huge step, and not the only story out of South America this week involving Bitcoin and blockchain. An 11,000 man raided the Torocan in Venezuela, which is a very notorious stronghold for a crime syndicate in Venezuela, and it revealed more than the typical contraband. They had a mini zoo, a swimming pool, rocket launchers, grenades, and Bitcoin mining rigs. Yep. The prisoners were mining Bitcoin. That's
genius.
Probably the biggest moneymaker they could have. And potentially legal. Who knows? But
well, I think they're stealing the energy, right? So
that's your counter
free electricity. Yeah. I mean, it's an open source network. It's not used by all good guys. Yeah, I'm sure. But yeah, I mean, I think they're basically stealing the energy to mine this. And one of the reasons they got shut down. Stop stealing my energy.
But given the razor-thin profitability of Bitcoin mining this year, the fact that they had free electricity definitely helped their margins.
Do you think they were able? And nothing was mentioned of this, but the Bitcoin that they mined, do you think they're going to be able to confiscate that? I don't think so. It's hard to imagine that.
I don't know.
Like, that's been mined. That's gone.
I mean, that would be really interesting. And whether they can prove which prisoner was mining Bitcoin. That's a whole...
It's a, negative story for mining, negative sequence. I mean, it could certainly be used to FUD Bitcoin a little bit. You can see how people who are politically motivated to squash Bitcoin might want to use this story.
But I mean, I think it's a fun adoption story and an interesting thing that criminal industries are starting to see the profitability in Bitcoin,
the value,
which is kind of interesting and funny in and of itself. Another adoption story, because I'm going to call that Bitcoin adoption. A Bitcoin adoption fund was launched by Nomura, which is Japanese financial services giant, and their digital asset subsidiary, Laser Digital, introduced this new fund that would help provide Bitcoin exposure to institutional investors. We're really seeing Japan start to jump forward. They were very much in a holding pattern and kind of falling behind in terms of adoption, and have really started to forward using Komanu, a joint venture between Nomura, Ledger, and CoinShares for the custody of assets. So they're really starting to jump forward and adopt Bitcoin, at least for institutional exposure and other exposure moving forward. They have a virtual asset regulatory operating license from Dubai, and they're paving their way to offering more digital asset trading services and investment products to their clients. So this is pretty major for both Japan and for Bitcoin adoption.
Yeah, I'd love to see institutional investing coming into this space. That can hopefully going to be a big part of the narrative in the next bull run. Another fun little tidbit out of the story, their Bitcoin adoption fund, and it's their first product, but it's long only exposure. I thought that was interesting.
I guess it's maybe spot. I would imagine it's probably spot Bitcoin.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Or leveraged. It doesn't really go into details of that, but I just thought it was interesting. Long only. You can't short it. So good. Bullish.
Bullish for Bitcoin.
Bulls only, please.
We're now moving into kind of the macro. There's not a lot, but enough to talk about, especially if you start talking about the Bitcoin price. Looking at the U.S. calendar, we have PCE numbers this day. Those are a measure of inflation, and they were a favored measure by the Fed at one point this year. So we'll see how these numbers shape up. They are currently expecting the PCE numbers to remain flat, at least core, compared to last month. But we have seen that core numbers flipped, especially, non-core numbers have flipped a lot lately. And so whether we might see the PCE index jump on non-core numbers could be very interesting.
Interesting to see the PCE numbers and inflation. Any kind of inflation numbers can affect the market, but the one that I'm kind of eyeing for is the Friday after and the unemployment numbers, because it seems like that's where some hype and people kind of expecting something to break in the unemployment numbers eventually that may cause a pivot.
Yeah, people are expecting that, but we still. And I'll be very surprised to see it happen. If we look also towards the next Fed meeting, it's only November 1st, but looking back at last week's Fed meeting, we had some pretty interesting comments, including the fact that the Fed is not expecting a recession until 2027. So that is a change where they're talking more and more about a soft landing. And so unemployment numbers don't necessarily need to drop as significantly as people would expect for us to hit that soft landing or to have the Fed pivot. The other key takeaways is, although we didn't have a rate increase, the average prediction from Fed members is that this year would end at a quarter basis point higher than we are currently, with interest rates only dropping to about 4.75% by the end of next year. So that's a much lower drop than many were expecting, and was still very, very unclear on when their pivot. When Jerome Powell's favorite word was proceeding with caution, and they have the opportunity to take their time. So definitely talking higher for longer, and not seeing a dramatic cut rates. 4.75 on current interest rates by the end of next year would essentially be two to quarter basis point cuts, which you could essentially wait till the end of next year to really start making those cuts. They could, make one in June, one in September, one in December, and they would hit their targets. That's super interesting to see what might.
Well, for the upcoming next meeting, they're showing 80% chance of no change and 20% chance of an increase. So it'll be interesting to watch this 20 number in terms of kind of gauging how, new repacting, is this going to go up or down? But it still looks like, higher for longer. And two of the things that are putting pressure on that is what's going on in the Dixie and what's going on in the oil price, which are both kind of bullish trends. I mean, I don't know if oil prices are called bullish, but
they're going up. They're increasing. When we talked about CPI numbers last week, a large part of the CPI number increasing last week was oil and energy. Mm. And so oil prices have been jumped up. They're currently trading around $91, up from about 75 in June, in May and June. And so that's a significant increase when you consider your price of gas. And we are continuing to see increases. We'll likely see some analysts saying oil will get back to $110.
Pardon the pun, but that's fueling the fire for inflation.
Absolutely. And so this would play a part in the argument for higher for longer to help quell demand for oil and drive down oil prices. In terms of the Dixie has had 11 straight green weeks.
And to quickly, the Dixie is the dollar index.
Yeah, and it hit 106.1, which is its height since November of 2022. We're continuing to see strong Dixie numbers. They just had a golden cross on Dixie, and we're also we're kind of having diamond formation on the Dixie, so there might be a slight pullback because that always kind of happens with a golden cross, but there is definitely room for Dixie to keep driving higher. And the Dixie was a major player in kind of pulling back Bitcoin prices all the way into that November 2022 number. So when we had the FTX scenario, that was actually influenced also by the strength. And so some people are saying that continued strength in the Dixie will fuel the head and shoulders and descending triangle on Bitcoin on the daily chart and push prices towards the $20,000 to $22,000 range. I predict potentially backfilling the candle from March to about 90. So definitely some macro headwinds that are not moving in Bitcoin's favor right but
you have the dollar going, which is a traditional headwind, makes it harder for Bitcoin to perform. And then you have oil prices, which just puts pressure on keeping the Fed from pivoting, which is also just a headwind on risk assets in general.
Exactly. And if we're going to talk about some headwinds on Bitcoin, let's talk about some headwinds on alts. All of this is going to be amplified on alts, but Ethereum's also under pressure as the Ethereum blockchain's revenue plunges because of more and more people using L2s. L2s are considered the saving grace of Ethereum in terms of its scaling. But right now, just because the overall number of transactions on these L2s isn't high enough to help drive the network fees for Ethereum blockchain,
This was a really interesting story to me because... Oh, sorry.
They actually turned inflationary time in almost over a year.
Yeah, this was a really interesting story to me because of that narrative. So narrative emerged the merge when we went from proof of work to proof of stake. And I guess I didn't really have my head totally around how the tokenomics have changed and that it can fluctuate between deflationary to inflationary based on network usage. So that's a really interesting concept.
It's massive, and the fact that it went back inflationary has definitely scared people. The reality is that just transaction volume overall is down, and so you're rewarding validators, and because most of the transactions have moved to L2s, I think up to 95% of transactions are now on L2s. This is negative impacting the overall fees that the Ethereum Foundation's collecting. This is a temporary problem because as more transactions on L2s happen, so rather than 10,000 transactions are happening on L2s, we get 1,000. That will help drive the fees and provide enough transaction drive Ethereum to being deflationary again. So it
was interesting to see that this expansion of layer 2s, even if temporarily or in the short term, is having a negative effect, because you wouldn't on the surface necessarily think that, like, oh, this is good for Ethereum, and a way to invest in all these layer 2s is just to invest in Ethereum, but there is some negative impact to Ethereum.
Yeah, JP Morgan decided that they wanted to FUD ETH some more. A report stating that the Shanghai upgrade, which is when we moved to proof of stake, failed to boost activity, transaction counts, active addresses, total value locked, and saying that this is all I mean, if you look at the Bitcoin price since April, Bitcoin more or less is sitting below prices. We're definitely in a stagnating market. So to me, this is not a real answer. This is kind of like a fake FUD story in a sense of they're not really considering all the other factors. And moving to proof of stake wasn't necessarily going to increase total value locked, or, well, it was going to potentially drive total value locked in terms of validators, but active addresses or anything like that, especially because we've had L2s come out this year. L2s are what's supposed to increase active addresses and the number of transactions. This proof of stake was not supposed to do that. It had no impact on fees or network activity. So I think this is just a FUD story that is just showing a lack of understanding.
Well, it's not the only FUD story. Like, piling on that negative sentiment, crypto service provider Matrixport reiterated a negative crypto asset compared to Bitcoin in a Friday market update, citing shockingly low revenues and lack of buzz around the upcoming update did get delayed. The firm forecasted earlier this month that ETH could fall as low as $1,000 if the trend continues, which was not a number I'm used to hearing.
I wouldn't be surprised, though. We still haven't had coin reckoning. Shout out to Ben Cowan for the video. Yeah. But ETH...
That's 30-40% down from here, though.
It would be a major pullback. I don't know if we go as far as 1,000, but I do 1,300 or even 1,100 I think are in the realm of possibility. As we see twos kind of just maybe drive a bit of a narrative, and people start driving some of that FUD onto ETH, and maybe we see a little bit of inflation for a little while, and so that kind of increases supply and causes to drop in value for the short term, alongside these macro headwinds that are just not favorable for any kind of price increase in the market.
Yeah, in the risk assets. Well, just to kind of finish it's down, blue chip kind of, to quote Benjamin Cowan that brought up, besides Bitcoin, news of a possible decon for the Holsky, the Holsky testnet experienced launch issues. So they're talking about delaying the update. So we're still waiting for a relaunch of this Holsky. So Decon, just for what it is, it's going to combine two upgrades, the DNEB and the Cancun, and will bring various new features. The most notable of those features, the proto-dank sharding, which will improve Ethereum's scalability when final. So just a little update there.
Yeah, proto-dank sharding. If they wanted to talk about total value locked and network activity and number of active addresses, proto-dank sharding would be the update that JP Morgan should be citing. And if then they might have an argument. This delay is, not ideal, but because it does push their timeline into 2024. We were originally talking late fall, early winter of 2023. So hopefully it doesn't get too delayed and maybe we get March of 2024. And if we do see that improvement scalability for Ethereum and those dropped network fees from proto-dank sharding, I still believe in Ethereum. I saw a future, but everything's got some growing pains and they're still working things out. It's not too big of a concern to me. Binance US has been story
on the ropes.
Yeah, of a blockchain on the ropes and a business on the ropes. They did score a win against the SEC this week when the SEC was denied by the judge immediate act. The judge said that they weren't inclined to allow the inspection at this time and basically argued that they just need to keep cooperating together. This is to be expected. It's hard to say, depending on who you are and how you view, either say, good job, Binance. Obviously, the SEC has seen that, and so they're not granting access. Or you could say, oh, Binance isn't actually cooperating, and the judge isn't willing to SEC Binance's ball. So interesting notes from that case. At the same time, after they got this winning ruling from the SEC, Binance Global and CZ tried to go for an extra gut punch and requested a dismissal of the SEC lawsuit, which was filed against them, but we're waiting to see what that ruling is. I don't expect them to be ruled of, but they're just trying to roll with the wins.
The battle wages on. Yeah, I agree with you there. It's hard to them just throwing it out. And even in the, and the judge saying he was inclined not to allow that inspection, she's like, come back with more specific requests, So it's not over, yeah. It doesn't feel over, and hard to trust a chain with just such a target on its back right now. But yeah, we'll see how it's out.
I agree. I just don't think it's maybe gonna go as far. I think this will be a slow burn. Could it fuel a loss from Binance, or a little bit of a greater FUD run on Binance could fuel a drop alongside the macro headwinds possibly, but it's a bit more of a slow burn. It could be your
quote-unquote black swan, although that black of a swan,
No, that's it. So I don't think...
Like a white swan.
I think that's why I don't think the drop will be as significant as FTX. And I think the FUD narrative's been around, so it's a lot less likely to get more people, but it is the leading exchange in terms of trading volume daily by fold. So if Binance were to face closures, it could have some significant run on overall crypto liquidity and really drop the Bitcoin price as people maybe are forced to sell as they don't have another platform to move to and aren't ready to sets. So, thing to watch.
And speaking of exchanges, kind of our last story for today, there was an update out of the MT Gox. So this was a prominent crypto exchange that was hacked back in 2014, which led to 850,000 Bitcoin, which would now be worth $3 billion, being drained. The exchange ultimately managed to recover around 20% of the stolen tokens. And the creditors of MT Gox have been looking for some sort of relief with these tokens for a decade now. Like they're going to have to wait a little longer. The MT Gox trustee, I'm not going to announce that name. Yeah, I'm going to try. Nobuaki Kobayashi has officially changed the deadline for paying back the exchange's creditors from October 31st, Halloween, by the way, when I think the big paper came out on Halloween, from October 31st, 2023 to October 31st, 2024 for a year. Presently, MT Gox holds about 142,000 Bitcoin, some Bitcoin Cash, and some yen. And then let's see, the MT Gox repayment have impact on Bitcoin prices, the sheer size of the tokens being released, just because of the sheer size of the tokens being released. So we will continue to watch.
A thing to watch been that ever going FUD narrative alongside, I mean, I think Tether is that other ever going FUD narrative of what's going to collapse. And we've heard some rumors, but nothing has ever reached yet. So we'll keep an eye on it, and we support with Decentralized News. We're always posting YouTube first. Please let us know how you find our shorts, and please subscribe to catch our videos as soon as they drop. Our goal is really to provide unfiltered content that will help genuine discussions and help the entire space grow. So please remember, this is not financial advice, and we are not financial advisors. The show was presented for educational and entertainment purposes only. So please do your own research before making any investment decisions. Thanks for your support, and catch you